Hi guys, so my good friend Nick Ferrari decided to interview a journalist, can I say journalist, from the Daily Telegraph about how Michel Barnier, the chief negotiator for the EU, was visibly angry during a press conference. Now this is interesting because, for a number of reasons, because first of all, the Daily Telegraph is a pro-Brexit newspaper. Okay, so let's park that for a moment. And it's the only newspaper I have seen. Now, I haven't seen any other reports. Now, because I haven't seen other reports doesn't mean that it hasn't happened. But it seems to be the only newspaper that's talking about how Michel Barnier was angry during a press conference. But let's hear what the journalist has to say.
Headline in today's Daily Telegraph: Brussels is losing the argument in Brexit talks. Frost tells PM, that Frost being David Frost, the government's chief Brexit negotiator. The story is written by the Telegraph's Brussels correspondent James Crisp, who joins me now. Give us the background then to the messages or signals that the PM's receiving. James, good morning.
Hi, good morning. Well, I mean, really, you have to imagine, Nick, that we've got two big beasts facing each other here, the UK and the EU.
Okay, we've already started from a position that's based on a fallacy. That the EU, he's presenting the idea that the EU and the UK are equals in this negotiation. But he'd never say that the UK and the US are equals, or the UK and China are equals. It's very clear for most people that the UK and the US are not equals in negotiations, or the UK and China are equals in negotiations. So why is it always for the Brexiteers that the UK and the EU are somewhat equals?
Both sides are in their trenches, and both are saying to the other side, you've got to move. And that's almost been the story of Brexit in a way, but we've had this constant, no, you must go first, no, you must go first, and we're back in that situation.
Because that's how negotiations work. You say, okay, give me what you want, tell me your terms, and I'll tell you my terms, and then we come to a compromise. But the difference with this type of negotiation is that instead of coming to a conclusion that both sides agree with, the UK doesn't want to have an agreement. So it's like inviting someone into your home to fix your boiler because it's broken. You call a plumber, invite them in to fix your boiler. They fix your boiler, and then they say, okay, you have to pay me £100 for fixing this boiler. And you say, well, I want to give you monopoly money. And they say, I'm not going to accept monopoly money. I want real money. And you say, well, take it or leave it. I'm giving you monopoly money. This is basically the situation between the UK and the EU at the moment.
But last week, trade negotiations continued in Brussels and went very badly. I mean, on Friday, I don't think I've seen Michel Barnier look so angry.
Wow.
Wow. You see the way that Nick Ferrari is not a journalist. Nick Ferrari is not critical. He didn't question this journalist from the Daily Telegraph. He just listened to what he said and didn't challenge him at all. Wow, that's amazing. So you're the first person to tell me this, and I'm just going to take it as gospel that it's true because, well, you have said it.
I mean, it was really very unusual for him. You know, he's a very sort of unflappable, quite a distinguished gentleman. So, you know, it was strange to see him so visibly exasperated.
And you're associating this with the Brexit negotiations. Like, couldn't he be exacerbated for any number of reasons? Couldn't he be upset because he's having to wash his hands 25 times a day? Or he could be angry about having to use video conferencing instead of meeting people. You're automatically associating the way he's angry with the Brexit negotiations. Perhaps he's also angry about the Brexit negotiations, that they're going nowhere, that it's a waste of time, that he realizes that the British counterparts are not interested in having a negotiation, but they're there just to waste time. They're there to pretend that they're doing their job. It's like, if you go into a workplace and there are people who are working there in a project, and you know that they don't give a crap about that project, you know that they are just there to punch in the time, but you care about the project. Wouldn't it be a little bit frustrating?
I mean, his press conference was actually delayed due to some technical problems.
So his press conference was delayed, and you've pointed it out. Would this not be the logical conclusion? His press conference was delayed for technical reasons. He arrived out at the press conference and he was angry. Well, if I was trying to do a live stream, for example, and I had to deliver the live stream at a particular time and I was having technical issues, then I would be pretty angry about that. And probably people listening to the live stream would be understandably hearing anger in my voice.
And while the press conference was delayed, a British statement came out from Frost accusing the EU of having this ideological approach to the trade talks, of being inflexible. I mean, that's an accusation people are very sensitive to in Brussels, because it is difficult to get 27 countries behind one position.
But you're not getting 27 countries behind one position. He is there to represent. He has been given the power to negotiate on their behalf. It's not he's getting on the phone, okay, we have this, perhaps this trade deal. Get me 27 Zoom video calls so I can negotiate. I can explain to the 27 heads of state what I have agreed. It doesn't work like that. He has been given this authority, and that's it. He runs with that authority. Why are you inventing things that you know are false? I know it's false. You know it's false. If you're a journalist, surely you know that. I'm not a freaking journalist and I know it's false. You're inventing it. Why are you inventing it?
I mean, it is in almost every single area you can imagine, be it migration, COVID, EU budget. In fact, the only thing they ever seem to manage to get united behind is Brexit. Ironically enough.
And what was the source of his exasperation, James?
Of course, they're united about keeping us in the EU. You remember, it's a pity that Nick didn't actually just repeat that. That's what he probably wanted Nick to say. Oh yeah, they're only united when they want us to keep us in the EU. They don't want us to be free. They don't want us to be an independent country.
We find out why Michel Barnier was so angry.
I think it's the accusation.
I think it was the accusation. So you're a journalist who bases things on feelings, not on facts. You have no facts to support the idea why he was angry. You actually hinted at something that was probably more factual a moment ago. He had technical issues with his video conference. If you hadn't have actually said that, then I think your position would have been more tenable. But you actually gave away the game when you said he came to a press conference. The press conference was late because he was having technical issues and he was angry. But I'm going to go in a different direction and make a hypothetical about why he was angry.
That the EU is being unreasonable, that the EU is being inflexible and...
Sorry to keep interrupting this, but you think that Michel Barnier is some sort of guy that was who's an intern who was hired like 6 months ago or 6 weeks ago to do this job? You really think that he would get frustrated and angry with the British counterparts for saying that the EU is being difficult? You really think that he would get angry over that? You really think that he's that much of an amateur? That he would be hurt by unkind words and he would get frustrated and angry over unkind words? You know who you're talking about. He's Michel Barnier. I don't know him probably as well as you do. You have probably met him. You have spoken to him. I haven't. But I seem to know a little bit more about him than you do. And I'm not a freaking journalist. I'm not a freaking journalist. And I don't think you are. And I definitely don't think Nick Ferrari is. I don't know what the hell why the hell he calls himself a journalist.
Unyielding. As far as they're concerned, nothing in the negotiations should come as a surprise. Boris Johnson agreed a political declaration, a non-binding document setting out the aspirational terms of the trade deal. And, everything, more or less, that Mr. Barnier is asking for could be seen as being in that document.
So now you're trying to row back on the political declaration. So what Boris Johnson says is not really important. What Boris Johnson has promised is not really important. So when Boris Johnson lies to the British public, well, it's not a problem for you because you're a Tory supporter. So how can I put this? When he lies to the EU, it's okay. When he lies to the public, maybe you have a problem with that. So what is the value of a politician saying we're going to do something if you after will support them lying about it? But also the issue of the level playing field is something that Boris Johnson signed up to. Boris Johnson supported the level playing field, something that you guys are trying to backpedal on now.
It's just a case of interpretation, and both sides interpret it very, very, very differently.
And
then it's not an agreement. Back to my ridiculous example of giving monopoly money to the plumber. I can't say, well, I interpret monopoly money as legal tender, and they interpret monopoly money as not legal tender. It's just two different positions. Once again, if there's any frustration, it's understandable on the EU side, because the EU is attempting to bridge a gap with the UK. And I'm not being generous to the EU here. It's plain to see. When you have a negotiation, you try to come to an agreement where both sides are happy. Maybe you feel that you have gained something more than the other side, but if they appear happy, if they seem happy, then you can be happy too. It's always a compromise on both sides if you want to come to an agreement. But the problem with the Brexiteers and Boris Johnson and David Frost is that they have decided we don't want to come to a compromise. We don't want to bridge the gap. We don't want to converge on an agreement. We want to go in a different direction. So we're there. Well, what is the point of being there? What is the point in having a negotiation if you're not interested in having a deal? In the same way, what's the point in the plumber asking for me if I'm not going to give him legal tender? Asking me for legal tender if I'm not going to give it. I have no intention of giving him legal tender. In the same way, the UK government has no intention of having an agreement because they're not willing to compromise. They've said we're not going to compromise on anything. We're not going to give them anything. The EU has said we're willing to do this, this and this. The UK have said we're not going to do anything. But they're not even listening to what the EU have been saying. I've talked in other videos about how Michel Barnier was explaining something and the UK representatives would listen and say nothing and then leave. How is this a negotiation?
Go ahead, James. Go ahead.
I just said also, I think there's also a bit of surprise from the EU side. They're not dealing with Theresa May's team.
Are you attempting to insult Boris Johnson and David Frost here? They're not dealing with. Well, maybe it's not an insult. Like you had David Davis, a complete ignorant fool regarding trade deals regarding the EU, and now you have David Frost, who's slightly better, who's reasonably better, who understands things. But the problem is David Frost is the negotiator. He has been given a position to negotiate. The same way, Michel Barnier can't decide everything. He has been given a mandate. He has limits on what he can agree and disagree to in the negotiations. The same way as David Frost. So don't look at David Frost. Look at who is above David Frost, Boris Johnson. So in a way, you're looking at Theresa May versus Boris Johnson. Who in anyone's mind would think that Boris Johnson understands negotiations or understands EU rules and laws, trade, international trade, better than Theresa May? I'm no fan of Theresa May. If you follow this channel for any reasonable amount of time, you'd know that. But I would hold her in enormous esteem in respect to any abilities that Boris Johnson has.
You know, they're dealing with a team of people who have clear instruction from the top, a team of people who, certainly Mr. Frost, believes in Brexit.
But it doesn't matter whether he believes in Brexit. He's there to do a job. He has a mandate. He has a limit. Doesn't matter whether he believes in Brexit or not. It's about his ability. It's like if I work for a company, it doesn't matter how much I care about the company. The company prefer me to do my job because I'm competent. David Frost is competent. That's something in his favour. It doesn't matter about Brexit. It doesn't matter how much he cares about Brexit. What is this caring about Brexit? What is Brexit to care about? What is it? What is in Brexit that makes it important that people have to care about it? He's not a politician. He's not trying to win votes. He's there to do a job. Really, it's not a very good comparison, but somebody is paid to clean a bathroom. Does it matter whether they believe in the company or they don't believe in the company? I think to them, at the end of the day, they're there to do a job. They try and do the best job they can because of their own personal motivation. I want to do a good job. I think Michel Barnier, for the most part, is probably the same. He's there. He says, I'm a chief negotiator. I want to be a good negotiator because for myself, that's a good job to have. It has value, and I want to do a good job. Maybe he has his own personal opinions about the EU. I don't know them. He's never spoken personally about the EU, as far as I know. Anything he has said has always been as a chief negotiator or as a politician when he was a politician. But I've never heard him talk personally about it. But I don't care about what his personal opinions are on the EU. They're irrelevant because he's there to do a job in the same way that David Frost is there to do a job. Whether he's a Brexiteer or he's not a Brexiteer shouldn't make any difference because he's there to do a job. I really don't understand how this is relevant.
And, are motivated to go and sort of fight for what they see as the fundamentals of Brexit.
Please tell me what the fundamentals of Brexit are.
But, there is no continued jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice.
There's no continued jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. That is, please tell me where in the manifesto for Brexit there was that. Where did people vote? I no longer want to be part of the jurisdiction. But once again, this is a red herring. This is irrelevant actually to Brexit. Because when the UK leaves after the transition period, if it's not extended, there will need to be an arbiter. There will need to be an independent body that will decide who is in the right or wrong regarding trade or regarding regulations and laws. The European Union has said if you want to have a trade deal with us, you have to accept the European Court of Justice. Now, the European Court of Justice is not the EU. Brexiteers seem to think it's part of the EU or it's controlled by the EU. No, it's not. It's something separate. In the same way, the Council of Europe is different from the EU. The UK is actually part of the Council of Europe. So another thing that the Brexiteers don't seem to understand. But just saying that we need to leave and we need to no longer be part of the European Court of Justice, maybe because Brexiteers hear the word European, they're automatically triggered into thinking, oh, okay, this is something bad. We don't want to be part of something bad because it's European.
There is no influence of EU bodies in British life. I mean, whether you're...
There's no influence of European bodies on British life. What the hell does that mean? There's no influence of European bodies on British life. I have absolutely no understanding of what he's talking about here. It's just a word salad. Really, I honestly don't understand. There's no influence of European bodies on British life. Like, I don't know really how to...
Remain or leave, I think you have to agree that Brexit does mean those things come to an end.
Things that don't make any sense come to an end with Brexit. That's all I got from that call. Things that have nothing to do with Brexit will come to an end. And things that make no sense will come to an end. I really wish the end of no sense would be instigated with Brexit. But unfortunately, Brexit did the absolute opposite. It created a lot of nonsense and no sense. Really, it's... Once again, this is one Brexiteer stroking the ego of another Brexiteer and them having an attempt at trying to, belittle Michel Barnier by trying to bring out this idea that he's somewhat angry about the British position and he's somewhat defeated by the British position. Once again, as I said before, there isn't a convergence, there's a divergence in these negotiations. The European Union want to go closer to Britain, and Britain want to go in the opposite direction. So how can you have a negotiation in that way? If Michel Barnier is frustrated because his technical equipment isn't working, I think it's a huge step to go from that to say that he's frustrated that the UK are attempting to play political games. He has been dealing with these people for years. He understands how they work. He's not an idiot. But the Brexiteers seem to think that he is. Or, look, we've owned him because he's angry. We got one on him. Let me just break it very simply to you. Once again, Michel Barnier is not the EU. He's not the boogeyman. He's not the enemy. He's there to do a job. The same way that David Frost is there to do a job. I have nothing against David Frost. I hope he does a good job for himself as a person, as a professional. The same way I hope Michel Barnier does a good job for himself as a professional. There's nothing more to them. They're there to do a job. What their personal beliefs are, I hope they will leave at the door. Because if they are professionals, they would leave them at the door. Let me know in the comments, guys. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks. Why not become a Patreon and enjoy access to our Discord server where we share news, chat, and have some fun. If you become a patron, you can also make video suggestions on topics that are important to you. Check it out via the link in the description.